Hey everybody, it's Stars About Stars project and me, Irina Samsonenko. Usually in this studio we talk about stars and influence of the universe, but today we have a very special guest in this studio. It's Ukrainian American family. They say that every big story and every big love story is created on tragedy. That's what happened to my guests. Please, our great family, Irina Samsonenko, Antonia, and Reuben Johnson. Hello.
Hello, Irina. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that finally I had a chance to talk to you here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much. I would like to say first, because we're going to go now deep into your personal story and about those events that are happening here on the planet and Ukraine in our motherland. And we are aware that we're going to touch politics, but we're going to stay away from politics as well. Because, this interview, it was created by me a long time ago because I was waiting for your family to come, you know that. And I'm very happy that you're finally here. And I live here in the United States, that is Reuben's motherland, for a good year. And I meet very interesting people, and all those people, they're asking me very different questions, like Ukrainian person. And that's why today my questions are based on my personal questions and interest of the people who are American citizens, to open up the truth, what is reality of Ukrainian-American relationship and the war that is happening on my motherland. So, please, Irina, tell me what happened on that tragic day for you, 24th of February, personally?
When we woke up and we realized that the war started, we could not believe. Something like it was an episode from the movie, but not from real life. We didn't know what to do, honestly. So, as a result, we ran outside of Kiev because we were living in Kiev, it's the capital of Ukraine. And we stayed in occupation area with our friends. So, when we decided to leave this place for more safe place, and we were driving our car, we ran into Russian soldiers who shot us with machine guns, and it's a miracle that we were not wounded, because our car was full of bullets and the windows were broken, and honestly, I don't know how we survived. And after that, we were imprisoned almost for 2 weeks on the ground of Gostomel airport. It's military airport nearby Kiev. So they held us there. They questioned Reuben all the time, and the conditions there were inhuman. It was impossible to be there. It's no food, limited quantity of water, and we lived just like, every minute you don't know what happened to you. Next moment, maybe they just shot you, maybe they just start torture you.
Did he keep you separately?
No, thanks God, we were in the same room, and because if they will separate us, can become crazy. It's impossible to be, lonely. But there we were only prisoners, only me and Reuben. So as I understand, we were like VIP prisoners there, because as American correspondent, Reuben was, as we understand, very interesting person for them.
But did they really realize who Reuben is?
I think yes, because look, when we were running from Kiev, because everybody was thinking that Kiev will be taking but Russian soldiers, okay? So, of course, we took everything with us. My jewelry, all our money, and his documents, laptop, everything. So when they stopped us by shooting our car, they find, of course, his passport, American passport, documents, because he wrote so many articles And all these articles were about military things. It's airplanes, yes, Reuben? So they understood who he is, and most probably this Russian soldier, they didn't kill me as Ukrainian, just Ukrainian civilian woman, only because of him, because he was he's an interesting person for them. Yes, they wanted him, so they understood that if they kill me, maybe they could not take from him information what they think he can give them. So it's it's something like I'm alive only because of him.
Reuben, tell me please, do you feel that Russian soldiers are so much uneducated, even understanding who you are, to let you go after 10 days, as I remember?
I'd studied the Russian military most of my life. Of course, there was a very high level of sophisticated at the upper ranks, the very high-ranking military theorists and so on. But the soldiers, I really couldn't believe how stupid they were. One of them was looking through my baggage, and I had a copy of a brochure, an advertisement for an exhibition I was going to attend. And they couldn't read English. The brochure was in English, but there were numbers like how many companies had exhibited the last time and how many people, and they thought this was secret information. I mean, all this stuff, anything, a picture of an airplane, it must be secret. No, it's a magazine. Have you ever seen a magazine before? I mean, I was flabbergasted. And I'm even more flabbergasted now when I see video footage of, let's say, the Ukrainian army overruns a Russian bivouac area where the Russian soldiers are staying, and you look around, what does it look like? It looks like the aftermath of a rock concert or some big, community festival, anything but a military encampment. There's no discipline. There's no small unit leadership. It's a bunch of thieves and murderers with weapons.
But did you use any special psychological tricks to take their attention away?
I can't imagine that anything like that would have worked with them. I mean, we're not talking about people who understand anything about the outside world. And the worst thing is they were all stupid enough to believe that they said, we were all told we'd be in Ukraine for 4 or 5 days and then we'd be back home. We were just going to take the whole country just like that. And they believed that.
They should have started with some other post-Soviet country. It's not about Ukraine. Our country survived after 3 revolutions. We fought against our own presidents. So we know how to fight for the truth and justice.
Well, they forgot the history of the Second World War. The most ferocious partisan activity was in Belarus and Ukraine.
Yep.
That's where the Germans suffered the most from behind. And we're seeing that today now. The Ukrainian army operating behind the lines, the actions that are being taken by special operations units are just absolutely astounding, and they're destroying the Russian military's ability to prosecute the war as well as sapping morale.
Reuben, you're great in history, and we know that Ukraine, under so many countries, it was like transit zone for last 400 years, and it was 25 great fights, all historical, books they can tell you about that. So Ukraine is quite famous and very attractive piece of land. But in 21st century, when everything is peaceful, do you want to tell me that some other country nowadays could come besides Putin and take Ukraine, or it's typical pro-Russian position?
It's typical of what happens when you have a failed, not very intelligent KGB officer with no skills taking over a country. Putin has insisted that everything that he has done since he took over in 2000, he keeps saying that, I'm doing this to make Russia more powerful, everything he's done has made Russia weaker. I can't think of one thing he's done that's improved the situation in the country. And if you look at his record, you see he was a complete failure as a KGB officer. The only thing he was good at was stealing and using the power that KGB badge gave him to act outside of the law.
And covering stealing of the other people. That's why he appeared to be a president.
So this is the theory that I wouldn't say it's a theory. I'd say it's observable fact. Putin had to invade Ukraine because the one thing, the greatest threat to him, are prosperous European countries on his border. He's afraid his people will look across the border and say, "Oh, well, why can't we do that? Why can't we live like that?" So that's why Ukraine had to be destroyed. All this stuff about NATO this and NATO that, NATO's going to attack us. Really? Well, if that's the case, then why has he taken all of his troops away from the borders of these dangerous NATO countries like the Baltic states, like Norway, and moved those troops to you? If NATO's so dangerous, why has he left his NATO borders undefended? Because it's a lie. It's a complete lie. And I want everybody out there listening who talked for the last 30 years about what a terrible thing it was to let these newly free nations into NATO, about NATO was encroaching on Russia. Really, that was a real no. This is a canard.
You know, for everybody who is living abroad, when they talk 10 years ago to Russian-speaking person that could be a citizen of any of 15 republics, post-Soviet republics, they think he is Russian. So let's say when I'm walking in the street, they think I'm Russian because they're their prototype. Nowadays, we are really separated. We know who is Armenian, who is Russian, who is from Georgia, and so on and so on. So Ukraine, in the eyes of foreigners many years ago, was not that famous. Nowadays everybody knows what is Crimea, that is my little motherland, what is Ukraine. And our country was always famous for athletes, for singers. We want like any kind of tournaments, Eurovision, boxers. But not everybody knows that Ukraine was very famous for nuclear weapon that was given away by Kuchma. That was our president for a long time. Could you share that fact with us?
Well, of course, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And so because of its geographic location, it made certain military sense to locate certain types of facilities on the territory of Ukraine. So there's a lot of overhaul plants for weapon systems. There were ammunition facilities, ammunition dumps way in excess of Ukraine's needs because Ukraine was supposed to be the supply depot if the Soviet Union ever went to war with NATO. And there were nuclear weapons as well as nuclear bombers based on the territory of Ukraine. And so the history is very simple, is that the weapons were there on Ukrainian territory, but the release codes were in Moscow. The Ukrainians could not use those nuclear weapons, but they would have been smart enough to break those codes eventually. So the deal that was made was that if Ukraine and Belarus were to return their nuclear weapons to Russian soil, or not return, or transfer them to Russian soil, and the Americans paid for most of this, then in that case, the United States and the United Kingdom and other European countries signed an act called the Budapest Memorandum, and Russia signed it as well, and it said, well, if we get our nuclear weapons back, all of them that were developed during Soviet times, and they're now all in Russia, then Russia will recognize in perpetuity, that means forever, they would recognize the borders as they exist today, the 1991 borders from when the Soviet Union fell apart. And this was frequently violated by the Russians, but that's the Russians. The only reason they sign agreements is so they can break them.
Thank you. Antoni, I have a question for you. Your father just mentioned Great Britain and you live in London, correct?
Yes, right now I study in London.
Great. How do you see war from their point of view? Because it's not Ukraine, it's not Russia, it's not United States. So Ukraine is fighting nowadays for its own independence and territory, or we are really preventing the world from World War #3?
That's a heavy question. I'd say yes and no to the World War III part. From the UK part standpoint, I'd say a lot of people are really supportive. So I know a lot of people in the UK who are bringing in a lot of Ukrainians. So there's a lot of programs like Homes for Ukraine where they help them get visas, they take care of them, they live with them, they give them job opportunities. I have a lot of friends my age who have been able to get actually quite well-paying jobs, like actual average income jobs and to actually live and take care of themselves in the UK, who are, like, I mean, you could say they're kids still. They still get offers to study. They're considered as refugees, so basically they get a lot of the rights that, let's say, regular UK people would. Like, they would get funding for universities, like student loans, which you usually can't get if you're a foreign citizen. And there's a lot of benefits in the UK in general for Ukrainian students.
What is the attitude to Russian students nowadays?
I'd say it's a lot worse. Like, it was bad already at the beginning. Right now, I'd say it's a bit more calmed down. A lot of the people nowadays tend to forget that the war is still going on. Quite a few, just because it's not on the news 24/7, and it's kind of, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to say something. This is the United Kingdom has done. I'm talking about the government. The United Kingdom has done a fabulous service to everybody, because particularly when Ben Wallace was still the defense secretary, and particularly when Boris Johnson was prime minister, but even after he left, they have been at the forefront of almost every single major decision. Every time the Ukrainians ask for a weapon system of some kind that's more advanced, there's all this hand wringing and, oh my God, it's going to be oh, what are we going to do? Oh, what if this happens? And the UK has just said, we're going to do it. And they have literally shamed the United States into taking actions like agreeing to send advanced main battle tanks, which the UK agreed to first. The UK were the first to agree to send to Ukraine long-range air-launched weapons, the Storm Shadow missile. So Ukraine would not be, I can't imagine what the Ukrainian military would be, the situation they'd be in today without the United Kingdom. Yes, in terms of dollars, the United States is sending more. They're sending tons of equipment. But the UK has really forced this administration, which I give a lot of bad marks to on several levels. They've really forced this administration to take steps that it should have been the United States first and the UK second, instead of the other way around.
Reuben, I recently read that Poland, that helped us a lot from day one, they now should have cut off a little bit their support. Does it relate? Because don't forget, I'm reading from distant American newspapers, so I really wanted to find out for myself. Does it relate? Is it true?
Well, in the past 15 years or so, I've spent about half my life in Poland. What's happening is this. Okay, the Poles have some conflict with with Ukraine, and it basically comes down to Ukraine cannot transport grain from any of the Black Sea ports because of what the Russians are doing. Now, the Russians are doing this and they think, oh, well, this is hurting Ukraine. It is hurting Ukraine. It's actually hurting a lot of people in third world countries, because Ukrainian grain is about 40% of what's used by the UN World Food Program. So there are hundreds of millions of people are going to be starving now because of what the Russians are doing. So they can't ship the grain out of the Black Sea ports, so they've been sending it overland by rail or by truck or by whatever way, and it ends up in Poland. Okay, it's expensive to send grain by ground transport. That's why you normally would send it by ships. So it gets to Poland, and it's too expensive to ship it on further, so it gets dumped on the Polish market, which causes the price that Polish farmers receive for their grain to drop. Now, that's bad in any time, but the Poles have an election coming soon, and there's a lot of back and forth infighting, and and the party in power wants to keep the margins that they have. So this is hurting their political standing. So this has resulted in some unhappy exchanges between Zelensky and the Poles, and what they're saying is, for now, they're going to stop. They're going to continue shipping all the weapons that they had promised before, but they have not promised any additional shipments now, because they're saying we have to defend ourselves. The way to solve this is for the EU to get in and provide ways to pick up that Ukrainian grain and take it on, move it further on to out of Poland to other countries that could use it. And that would go a long way to solve this conflict. But that's what's going on. The Poles are not abandoning the Ukrainians. But this kind of fighting between Ukraine and Poland is very, very unhelpful, and I wish it would stop right now.
Yeah, they provided a huge support, and every single Polish person that I met here is so kind and warm-hearted, I have to tell you.
The Poles, I'll tell you this. I mean, America is by far the largest donor of aid to Ukraine in terms of dollars. But the Poles are the country that are donating the largest percentage of their gross national product to Ukraine. So they're doing a lot. I mean, it's a smaller country, but they're doing a tremendous amount.
Yep. Thank you.
Let me just say one other thing while we're talking about percentages. I'm tired of hearing people say, and this includes some really stupid members of Congress, say that, oh, well, why are we worried about the Ukrainian border when we're not worried about our own border? And there's all this. What we're sending to Ukraine, all of the aid, everything together, it's 1.5% of our national budget. It's 5% of what we spend on defense. Not a single American soldier is dying. If you can destroy the entire Russian army for 5% of your defense budget and you don't lose a single person, that's the best deal you're ever going to get. And I wish the people talking like this would shut up. I really do.
I thank you so much, because it was one of my main questions, how this interview came out. You know, I'm talking to people and they really ask me, we're sending you money, guys. We're making money, we're paying taxes. I can understand American side, definitely. But if war is really happening, that's why I wanted really to start with Irina, with women, with feminine side, to understand how sensitive, how touchy all the situation is when kids are dying, when kids are raped, when we are losing our new generation, when we are losing our men. And yes, United States does help a lot, but people have to understand, because, you know, like, I really wanted to ask you a few more detailed questions about that side, but I appreciate so much that you gave that percentage.
Well, this is the other thing. There are these people out there saying that, well, the Ukrainians should just give away some territory. You know, they come off there so intelligent and, you know,
I heard that
and
yesterday.
sage and I say, okay, all right, fine. That's it. Tell me where that territory, what is it? As soon as you say this territory is now going to be Russia forever and it'll never go back to Ukraine, well, everybody knows what happens in the occupied territories. The women get raped and murdered and their bodies burned. The men get thrown into labor camps or castrated or both. And the children get taken away to Russia. There are children now from Ukraine that have been shipped so far into Russia that they are now located closer to Alaska than they are to the country, Ukraine, where they came from. So everybody knows that's what's going to happen if that territory is allowed to remain as part of Russia. So they're going to leave. You're going to see the largest refugee crisis, the greatest human migration crisis we've ever seen in our lives. Anybody know how much that's going to cost? That's going to be so much more than any weaponry being sent to Ukraine now that you can't even imagine.
And really, how you can say, yes, give some your land away. Yes, it's what it means. It's like to say to mama, you have 10 children, so give away, choose which one and give away with 2 free children from your 10th. So it's something like it's not normal. It's how even possible to think this way.
You know, this position, they're a huge country, 50 states absolutely admire United States, just to be clear. But nobody gonna come, because Putin will never do that type of thing to take Alaska back, for example.
Yeah.
So, you know, to give one of the
And so many China lands which Russia took before, you know that, and China can ask, okay, give us back our land.
Comparable.
Yeah.
Well, this is where I really blame what I just said to you about the percentages and so on. Nobody in the White House ever explains this. You never hear anything. And what's worse, here's what gets really interesting. You see these numbers, these aid packages, 20 billion, 10 billion, whatever. And people see those numbers and they're just eye-watering because they're comparing it to their monthly pizza budget. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
All right?
Marketing tool.
And so they look at this amount of money, and I'm like, hello, people. Most of this money never leaves America. It goes to American defense companies, orders to build weaponry to replace the weaponry we've sent to Ukraine, so it goes back on the shelf so we have enough for our own armed forces. So again, who's benefiting from this? Well, the money's not going to Ukraine. It's going to feed the families of American defense workers because they're getting more hours. They're hiring more people. Weapons, particularly ammunition, has a shelf life. So we're giving things to them that we're either not using, that we had put into mothballs, or it's equipment that's beyond its shelf life, and it's being replaced with brand new gear. So
also, do you consider that, like, let's say each of the equipment that they replaced, right? Like the equipment, the new one is going to cost like 2-3 times more than what they actually give. So, like, let's say out of those $20 billion, the actual value of the stuff they're giving could be like a third of the actual budget of what they're actually like saying the budget is.
You know what is great, Antonia, that you guys speaking numbers in percentage, because you are totally right. So I personally heard three numbers: 75 billion, 140, and 300 billions that were donated to Ukraine, humanitarian support, financial support, and so on.
Understand
Okay.
what money.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is it? What
But,
is
but,
it
but
really?
wait a minute. When they say donated, okay,
Yeah.
I love this word, because here's an example. Okay, the Germans are saying, "Whoa, look how great we are. We've 100 million euros worth of blah blah blah." It turns out they have sent Leopard 1 tanks. Now these things are old. The current tank produced in Germany, used by the German armed forces and other people, are various models of the Leopard 2. The Leopard 1 is very old. Most tanks today have a 115 or 120 millimeter gun. The Leopard 1 has a 105 millimeter gun. It's actually made in the UK. It's a Royal Ordnance 105. And they are sending these tanks, and they're sending them without spare parts. They're not in very good working conditions. They're so bad that the Ukrainians are telling the Germans that this is what you're going to send us, don't send any more. But on the books, on paper, they're worth so much money, and the Germans get credit for sending junk.
Yeah, there is no such a thing as a free lunch. It's going to be...
So they're sending junk, but they're getting credit for, some huge donation. So when people say donations, okay, what does that mean?
You know what, coming back to your personal story, because I want to answer, and I will admit this question many times, if war is really happening. Yes, it does, unfortunately. So, Irina, tell me please, Reuben mentioned that he spent time in, actually in Russia also, but in Poland, in Ukraine. How did you guys meet? What brought great American citizen to Ukraine? Probably love.
First of all, thank you for this question, because it's the story of our life. I met Reuben in Kiev. So, as I remember, you were there, yes, for some business. And I just, after my work, I came into the bar and just to have some coffee. So he saw me, and I don't know, it was a love.
And that's it.
With first sight, yes. He saw me, and it's something like 2 weeks. We were seeing each other, and after that we decided, okay, in 2 weeks he proposed to me. Yeah.
Wow.
He asked my parents. Yes, it was so kind. It was, oh my God, and even unexpected. It's something like.
Now I know what unites Americans and Ukrainians. We are decisive.
Yeah.
We are making moves.
Yeah.
Yes, and the product of this love is sitting here with
Our
us, Antonio.
Antonio.
So, Antonio, I know that you have your personal story when those things that happened to your parents and they were captured and they were, thank God, next to each other. But you were going through hell, your own hell. What was your not kids position? It was a very adult position. What did you do? How did you try to save your parents?
I mean, originally, they went missing on a Friday. So I didn't know at that point, because the people they were staying with, there was like no signal, there was no electricity, nothing. Like I couldn't get a call in. I was trying to contact for like a few days. The last time I talked with my mom was on Wednesday. And they basically said, just in case we don't have any electricity, so like if we don't call for the next few days, like it's most likely because like we can't charge our phones or whatever, stuff like that, but we should get in touch with you. So 2 days go by, I call on Friday, I'm like, okay, 2 days go by, and they must have figured out a way how to charge their phones or anything. And so still no answer, and I try to call like the daughter of the friends they were staying with. I'm like, I need you to keep in contact with your parents, and So I asked like anything about my parents. She said no, they didn't say anything. Okay, so Saturday passes by, still get in touch, and then on the Sunday I managed to actually get in touch with the friends they were staying with, and they go like, okay, so on Friday this is like what happened, like your parents got captured, everything. So my immediate reaction is like Sunday morning, my immediate reaction
Who
is like,
exactly announced you that news?
Lukhovsky, so it's like
Your friends.
Yeah, so it's
Your
like
friends.
the friends and the family. So
Okay.
originally it was like, yeah, so I managed to barely get through the call through the daughter. Then after, so I managed to get the call to Natalia Dukhovskaya, which are the friends that we were staying with, and they basically told me, so like, your parents got captured on Friday. So my first reaction is, what do I do? What's next? So immediately I called the U.S. Embassy in England. So that's the first place I managed to get in touch with. The people there redirect me later on to the U.S. Embassy in Russia. So,
Russia.
Yeah, so I had to talk with the head there. Now, I didn't get much response at first. So like originally when I was talking, I was trying to kind of figure out, they were trying to see what we could do. And meanwhal, while that was happening, I contacted a personal friend of the family. I contacted a personal friend of the family called General John Chapner, and my dad can say a bit more about his like service in the United States Air Force and more about him. But I managed to get in touch with him, and he, let's just say, basically riled up the embassy and the Pentagon, so they would actually like start acting and not the regular bureaucratic paper pushing stuff that they usually like to do. Now, after that, I was like, okay, so I gotta actually think of something. So next thing I do is I get in touch with anyone I can in Ukraine. So like people I knew, a lot of people called into the SBU, which is like the Ukrainian, like what would you call it? Like what would be the analogy in the US?
Well, it's
FBI?
FBI, Ukrainian FBI.
Kind of.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
Yeah,
really.
not really.
Not really.
There is no other FBI,
it's
but
like an amalgamation of every
Yeah.
American special service that there is. I mean, but the majority of it's domestic
yeah.
security. And
How many days did you keep you on hold, waiting to understand if your parents are alive or not?
I'd say out of the 12, I think, yeah, it was, it was out of the 12 that I was aware of, I think.
10.
So basically, and I'll explain a bit more right now. So what happened was, I actually got some people to do some stuff. I contacted.
You talk to, first of all, from here, we have American family, family Markel
Especially.
family.
Yeah.
So what we find out later, of course, that
So
they tried to
contacted
contact
the U.S. The senators, one of the U.S.
So you
senators.
did it from different sides.
Yeah,
so from
yeah.
Ukraine,
Yeah.
yes, from his side,
Yeah.
it's Pentagon and State Department and embassies. And you know what? It was really new. Now I can say funny. That my friend from Ukraine, they were in different countries of Europe, okay?
Yeah.
In Italy, in Poland, in Spain. So when we disappeared and our friend put on Facebook information that Ira and Reuben, they disappeared. So in 10 minutes, it was something like 5,000 reposts. So people, they were, you know, it's so active trying to find us. So when these people abroad called to American embassy, for example, in Poland or in Italy, and said, okay, our friend Johnson and Samsonenko, they disappeared. They were machine gunned and something like that. I said, okay, we know already about that. We are working on that. So it was really, it's how to say, not public, but you know, it's like
known.
resonance.
Basically,
Yes,
it was something well known.
Yeah, so it's really a lot
yeah.
of people were working to find us first and to save us.
So
It was beginning of the war.
And
So
it
it was
beginning.
like one
Nobody
of the
knows
first big
what is
cases.
going on, where are Russians, what they can do to us when we were imprisoned.
Yeah.
So, and honestly, I was glad when I was inside. I was glad that Antonio was not in Ukraine when the war was started. Because, and for me, it was, you know, something like,
Of course.
like for mom, it was the most important thing. So that's why, how many children already dead in Ukraine. And I'm so sorry about all these families who lost their someone who is close to them. It's really big tragedy.
Oh,
Who
I see what you mean.
mostly help you? Your friends?
Yeah, friends. I mean, we got we got no help at all from anybody at any of the U.S. embassies or anything abroad. I mean, we came out of Ukraine. We had all our money was gone, all our computers were gone, all our phones were gone. We had no clothes. We had nothing. And our friends helped us, but no official help whatsoever. And so I said, okay, well, we're here in Poland. Is there anything, can we get refugee status? Is there anything? And it was like, oh, well, you're an American. You should just go home. You don't need our help.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Think I'll go buy a robot.
Everybody is independent, yeah?
Yeah, that's really what it felt like. It's like, oh, well, you're an American. You're not, you're just supposed to go back where you came from.
Yeah, I understood.
So
back
it
to your
was
roots.
that was eye-opening in that sense. I mean, but the only thing the U.S. Embassy offered was, well, we could loan you some money, but you'd have to sign. I'm like, okay, well, I can borrow money from a bank, right? Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's been terrible, and I just, if I could say one thing to everybody out there, is that ever since we've been here, I've been working on the war effort as much as I possibly could, about 90% of it unpaid, because you can't find anyone who's interested in paying money for someone who's got expertise on Ukraine, expertise on the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian defense industry, which I have, but it's all, they're using the same people who sit in these positions in Washington, and this is why, what I talked about before, why the UK had to lead the US on providing certain weapon systems to Ukraine, why the Ukrainians still don't have F-16s, why it took so long to get so many other weapon systems, why every single, we've seen this rain dance 100 times now. The Ukrainians ask and they ask and they ask, and like I said, there's all of this, weeping and moaning, and then finally they get what they want. So
I want to ask you, because now recently our president started to travel after invasion. It was his first visit to Ottawa. And as I know, it was they came out with another number. It was like 6 billion or something like that. I don't want to lie or to flirt with the numbers. So tell me, please, what are your perspectives or expectations about this visit to United States in Washington, talking to Biden, and as well talking to Prime Minister in Canada?
Well, first of all, Zelensky had to, he had to make a trip to the U.S. because of the opening of the UN General Assembly, and he was finally going to address the General Assembly in person. He'd addressed it before several times on a video link,
Zoom.
but finally in person. So then if you've come to New York, then you've got to go to Washington, because it was really good for him to speak to the congressional leadership, not just the White House, but all of the different officials in Washington who are responsible for U.S. support for the war. And then, of course, if he's going to be there in person and he's got the time, yes, he needs to go to Canada, because Canada has an extremely large Ukrainian diaspora. And
I have my aunt living there, I know.
if there, when the Soviet Union fell apart, suddenly instead of one country, there's 15. Most nations could not afford, including Canada, most nations could not afford to open 14 new embassies. So Canada only opened one new embassy, and that was in Ukraine. They said, we have to have one. So there's an important linkage there. But I want to repeat something that I heard the Ukrainian foreign minister, Mr. Kuleba, say in February of this year. And he said how the war ends for him. And he says, I don't know for other people, he says, but this war ends for me when whoever is the president of Russia makes a apology tour and comes to Kiev and gets down on his knees, or her knees. I don't think Russia's ready for a woman president, so it's probably going to be his knees, but he gets down on his knees. It's about the only good thing you can say about Putin is he's only got daughters. So if he had sons...
He calls them these women. If
These
you
women,
heard this
yeah.
right, he said these women. I'm not
And
sure he knows where they live.
But anyway, the president of Russia gets down on his knees in front of the of the memorial that will be there to all of the victims of this war and begs the country's forgiveness. Until that happens, this war is not over.
Reuben, we all know that he has a twin, maybe few of them.
More than one.
Yeah, more than one, definitely. So, could it be that it's going to be some kind of Lenin story, then we don't even know when this guy going to disappear from this planet, and they will keep this twin going around?
No, they'll
doing
know.
Mistakes in the interviews, remember, in the young
They'll
age?
know because, I mean, I could go on for a long time about this, but you'll know because the presidential administration has an incredible degree of control over everything that goes on in Russia, much greater than what the Central Committee of the Communist Party had in Soviet times. The presidential administration's the most greatest concentration of power I think has ever been seen on this earth. If Putin is gone, then you'll know, because immediately people will be vying to take the position or take something. There'll be an immediate amount of infighting, and that's why everyone, when they say, well, if Putin dies, we could get somebody worse. Yeah, you could get somebody who's got a worse personality, although that's hard to imagine. But it won't be somebody worse in terms of the control they have over the country, because whoever becomes the next president is now going to have to make arrangements with every single power center in the country. And they'll say, well, we had this arrangement with Putin, but, you're going to have to give us more if you want us to support you, want us to back you. So I think we'll know he's incredibly paranoid. We've now had, at least we publicly know, there was a second defector from the FSO, the Federal Protective Service. And this man is actually, this is for the people who are listening and don't know this. The Federal Protective Service is a literal army of people that caters to Putin's every need. It's not just bodyguards, but it's drivers, it's maids, it's cooks. So anyway, in this case, the second man to defect was a dog handler, handling the dogs that patrol the grounds of wherever Putin happens to be spending the night. And he tells a story of Putin's paranoia getting out of control, that he'll make last-minute decisions about, no, I said I was going to stay in this mansion, but no, I'm going to stay in this one. And he would order the dog patrols to be doubled. And some of his residences are by the sea, and so he orders that armed frogmen should be swimming in the ocean by the beach to make sure that nobody can come ashore. I mean, this is a sign of a very sick mind and of a man who realizes that so many people want him dead.
This person who, on the top of that, they say he has a cancer. Yeah, that's why all these twins is going around.
I don't believe any. I've heard this story so
like
many
Israeli
times.
doctors, they refuse to help him because they're helpless.
If Putin had all of the cancers that I've heard rumors about, if he really had all these medical problems that we've heard about, you listed them all, well, he'd be inside of a jar at Harvard Medical School or something. I mean, he'd be a phenomenon of nature that no one's ever seen. So I don't believe any. I believe he's got some problems of one kind or another, but
I have some friends from Russia, because long time ago we were reunited. It was all good. We were one big family. We had relatives in all those countries. So we would never imagine that one day we're going to fight and hate each other. And I have to tell you, I know, and I'm friend only with people who are aware and who are human beings from Russia. And do you want to tell me that nowadays all this brainwashing Russia really brings the population of Russia to think that he's somebody and he's a great leader, or one day they're just living in fear, and when he's going to be gone, it's going to be like Fidel Castro's celebration of the death?
I wouldn't say it's either.
So they love him?
No. The thing is, there's a difference between, so like for example, a sadist, right? And then there's a sadist and a masochist. Masochist loves when a sadist tortures him. It's kind of a similar scenario, won't you think? So you get a situation where there's fear basically controlling the people, but at the same time they like the control because that same fear creates an illusion of grandeur. So it's like, I might be oppressed, but then you are being oppressed for something greater, which makes you think that you're better than everyone else. creating this kind of superiority that the Russians tend to have, that they're better than everyone else. So it's kind of like both ways. It's like two sides of the coin. Like, would you much rather live in fear but feel great, or would you much rather be free and feel like you're nothing?
But the other thing you have to remember is, okay, if you only have to talk to a Russian person for about 2 minutes to figure this out. But Russians are always victims. You notice that? They're never perpetrators. They've never done anything wrong.
Yes.
And this is why every time, Putin had a meeting with Macron or someone else, what did you hear afterwards? Well, the first 45 minutes are him pissing and moaning and crying and about all the horrible things that have been done to Russia, interlaced with some bizarre conspiracy theories.
That's why he started few wars.
So, and by the way, this has worked for him. This is what he became president because he started the Second Chechen War, and blew up some apartment buildings full of innocent people in the process and blamed it on the Chechens. This is how he invaded Georgia in 2008. And this, by the way, this is another reason why he thought he could get away with invading Ukraine, because he'd invaded Georgia in 2008. We really didn't do much of anything. He jumped over the red lines in Syria that Obama supposedly had drawn, and we didn't really do anything. He takes Crimea, and the sanctions are dribbled out, with an eyedropper.
Same thing with Donbass.
Same thing with Donbass. And this is all about, we can't offend Putin because, Barack Obama needs his Iran nuclear deal. That's the most important thing. And so he thought, okay, well, no one's done anything really that hurts me, so I can probably do this, number one. Number two, I really don't expect the Ukrainians to fight back. Number three, I really don't expect that NATO and the U.S. will unite and fight against me. As a matter of fact, this might actually split NATO. I might get a two for the price of one deal, and of course, none of this happened. And the tragedy for the Russians is that there were smart people telling him inside of Russia, people who had were respected in their particular former retired military and so on. They all told him this was going to happen. He just didn't want to know. So this is why we are where we are. But we have a war now, and it has to be fought, and it has to be won, and it has to be won to a degree that the Russians are humiliated. Because if they're not, if it results in some kind of negotiated settlement and they get to go back home and they still have an army intact, then we're going to hear the stabbed in the back business, and they'll be back at some point in the future.
Even if we don't go into that tough politics, but just we look at the position of the society of the world. I talked to my Spanish teacher who is traveling from Spain to Russia. I said, listen, what's going on in Moscow? Tell me. Are those fancy shops open? Yeah, everything is working. I said, so those high-end brands, they weren't taken away from Russian Federation because of huge income, of course. No, everything is working. Everything is perfect. I said, okay. So now I'm watching this tennis tournament that happened in London.
Yeah.
Last year, Medvedev was taken away from Wimbledon. What he's doing there this year, I just don't know.
Because without a flag.
Oh, without a flag, I'm sorry.
So basically what they said was that, it's the same thing with actually most sports, is that Russians can't compete under the Russian flag, Russian athletes, but they can compete as independent.
Okay.
Which is very dumb.
Listen, nothing to do. I'm not against people. I know that he's a great player. Okay, so I can say yes. But if you understand that everybody is fighting against it, his own people have to go against it. So let us play. Let us show our skills and talents. They don't really cut it off 100%.
No, they don't do it at all. Like, even when you were talking about brands, right? Like the same thing, like the joke is about like this thing where they did Vkusnaya Tochka, which is like the rebranding of McDonald's. All they did was so it's the same McDonald's company. It's owned by McDonald's. They just created a daughter company, which is in Russia, which is like registered in Russia, which basically avoids sanctions. So basically it's like, imagine you being a shareholder, you have a company which you basically own all the shares of, but it's technically a registered company in Russia, which have, at the beginning, we're still even continuing to use the old McDonald's packaging for selling stuff with just a sticker on top of it with a new name, but it was like the same thing. And that's pretty much all brands. And yes, maybe some brands suffered just because, like, for example, like high-end brands or like fast fashion brands, because they were recognized by their name. Because like if you change the name of a brand, that's kind of killing the brand most of the time when it comes to clothes. But in majority of the other stuff, really, no. Well, they didn't change at all.
I can tell you how some of this happens. Okay, so there are sanctions that EU countries are legally obligated to observe. So, since the war, trade or exports from Germany to Russia have dropped by 54%. But it's a strange thing. Exports from Germany to Kyrgyzstan have increased by 2,000%. A landlocked country with a population of slightly less than 7 million that places 148th out of the 195 countries in the world, which means it's really poor, and is not a trading powerhouse. Why do I think that stuff is not actually going to Kyrgyzstan? And so then I find out in the last couple days that one of the difficulties the Russians have had building main battle tanks is they have always been buying ball bearings from abroad. Hope the audience knows what that ball bearing is, but anyway.
Yeah, shortly explain.
Давай.
No, you explain shortly.
Oh, well, they are very finely machined at different sizes, little spherical balls coated with a particular type of material, and they're used in machinery. Anyway, it's one of the critical elements in any kind of mechanical piece of machinery. During the Second World War, the United States tried bombing all of the German ball bearing factories on the grounds that if they could destroy the ball bearing industrial base, then they couldn't make any weapons because it was like the single point of failure. Anyway, so the Russians can no longer buy ball bearings from Western countries. Now, they could buy ball bearings. They're not as good. They could buy them from China, but the Chinese don't want to start shipping tons of equipment to Russia that supports the war effort because, they would be put under sanctions themselves, which they don't want. The Chinese want to help the Russians in this war, and they are. They just want to make it look like they're not. So, again, funny thing.
They already helped us with COVID.
Yeah, that's right. Funny thing, exports of ball bearings from China to Kyrgyzstan have increased by 2,550%. So somebody in Kyrgyzstan is making a pile of money producing counterfeit customs paperwork, import certificates, and what have you, saying that materials came here, but they really didn't. And, these are the kind of things that you see happening, and it just makes my blood boil.
I mean, the reverse works as well. It's like people say, we put an embargo on Russian oil, no Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1, because that went kabloom. And in general, we aren't buying Russian oil, and that's why our prices are rising. Your prices are rising, but you're still buying Russian oil. You're just buying it from the Indians.
Yep.
And you're just buying it from the Chinese, or you're buying it from someone else who doesn't abide by the sanctions and buys the oil from Russia. And you're just buying it at a premium markup with someone in, let's say, India making a huge profit. And at the same time, you're basically paying for someone there making a profit, and you're still using Russian oil, which still funds the war. And at the end of the day, gas prices are through the roof, and you're most likely trying to save at least another gallon on your mile every time when you're driving in your Prius. So,
But I want to talk not only about my motherland, our motherland that is bleeding nowadays. A lot of harm and pain is happening on the planet. Recently started third wave of war between Armenia in Nagorno-Karabakh, yes, and Azerbaijan, and it was 1-1. So now, what's going on? What's your attitude, as a professional in that industry, Reuben?
Well, this is a proxy war. Armenia is being punished for trying to move out of the Russian orbit and agreeing to engage in some very, very low-level military exercises with the U.S. And of course, President Aliyev is a friend of Erdogan and a friend of Putin, and there's been fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh since the 1980s, actually. So this is another example of how the Russians will stop at nothing to create a conflict somewhere. Number one, it as I said, it punishes the Armenian president for trying to step out of Russia's orbit, and secondly, it creates a distraction.
I have a more general question. Let's say if we step aside a little bit and we look at what is going on with our planet. Have you ever heard of the theory of 1 billion?
Let's just speak about Russia and the former Soviet Union. There are endless sorts of academic works written by there was one particular man who was a genius in this field who's now deceased, about how in Soviet times in particular, but even after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russians were basically committing ecological suicide for themselves as well as for the planet as well. That everything they were doing was contributing to the land being destroyed, resources being exploited improperly, creating unsafe, unhealthy conditions for people. And I still remember, I think it was around 2019, I think it was, that Putin gave his State of the Nation address that he always used to give once a year to both houses of the Russian parliament, and he always used this address to spend a huge amount of time showing cartoons and CGI created videos and so on of all these doomsday weapons that were being designed. And then one of them was this cruise missile which supposedly had a nuclear powered motor on board, and he announced that this thing had already been test flown somewhere, and all these people applauded. And I remember that Mikhail Khodorkovsky spoke afterwards, and he said, "Do any of these people in this audience realize what they're clapping about? Do they realize this is Chernobyl flying above them? And if this thing crashes somewhere, or if the test is a failure, wherever it crashes, that's contaminated land." He says, and to think about a man who's got his finger on that red button talking about this. I mean, this is, I don't understand the mentality. I mean, we have, as you put it, all kinds of problems on the earth right now, but we have some mad people who don't care about what damage they do to this world.
Yep, absolutely. Now we have a situation that Zelensky is giving away some information about person who really supported him as a comedian for a long time. Kolomoisky, absolutely, who is one of those oligarchs. What is going on inside the country right now from that point of view, like separate Ukrainian corruption?
So, okay, my view on this, I'll let Antonio talk in a second. My view on this is the following. Whenever people talk the way you're talking, the other thing you hear immediately is that, oh, it's such a corrupt place, it's so much. I say, okay, now wait a minute. If Ukraine was totally corrupt, no one would be talking about this stuff. No one would be arrested, no one would be exposed, none of this would be happening.
Yep.
So the fact that it's out in the open and that there are actions being taken proves that the government's really trying to do whatever it can to prevent corruption. The other difficulty is that corruption is endemic in a lot of places, and I mean, we have this saying, and I spent so much of my life in Europe, but we always used to say, it doesn't matter that the EU has these regulations, whatever. There will never be less corruption in Greece than there is in Sweden. I don't care what you do. It's always probably going to be a problem in Ukraine, just because even before communism, there were certain historical traditions, there were certain habits, certain part of the culture. There's always going to be something going on. But the business with Kolomoisky, okay, if he was completely in control and could do whatever he want, well, he wouldn't be in the situation he's in now. You wouldn't even hear his name.
Explain the situation in short.
Yeah, they started to disclose a lot of facts about everybody, actually.
And see, the main problem inside the country is not like, I wouldn't say it's the governmental, it's more of the level of, there's, due to just martial law, there's a lot less freedom what you can do. It's a lot harder to operate inside the country. It's a lot harder to have a business right now inside the country, not just because of profit much, but just because of what relations you must have with the government. And also because there's also such thing now that you can be branded as a Russian collaborator if you don't, let's just say, if certain people in the parliament don't agree with the power of the president, which is like not really good.
They say even that it's difficult to adopt a kid nowadays in Ukraine. I don't know, as a woman, Irina, maybe you heard something about that?
No, I think it's not now. It's always was very difficult to adopt children. It's complicated, and also as I heard before, because I was working for a talk show "Говорить Україна" on Ukrainian channel back in Kiev, and we exactly were talking about families like that who wanted to adopt children and what happened after all, and when through what they went through, you understand? So it's so many steps they have to do, and sometimes it's bureaucracy, really paper bureaucracy. So it was difficult, and it's still difficult. And now I think with this war, it's become more and more difficult because you have to prove from where this child, where is parents of this child.
So this
Something
is
like,
I'll say something about this. This is another aspect, and this started a long time ago, but the orphanages in the former Soviet countries, particularly in Russia, this is true. Think about this for a minute. There are more orphans in these orphanages today than there were at the end of the Second World War. Wow. After so many parents have died, okay? And a lot of these kids in these orphanages are what they're called social orphans. Parents are still alive, but the parents, they're alcoholics, they're drug addicts, whatever, they can't take care of the kids. And the orphanages do not want these kids to be adopted because the more kids they have, the bigger their budget. Okay, so when you let a child be adopted, that's better for that child's life, but it's worse for you. And so it's a terrible, terrible system. There's every incentive for these people to not allow these kids to be adopted.
I pose all those questions because since beginning I promised you they are not going to be only my questions. People are questioning me. They tell me in your country it's a lot of corruption. I think corruption is everywhere, all over the planet. So
even in the Biden family,
Really? Even there? We didn't know that.
The only difference is he's got the world's best mob lawyer in the form of Merrick Garland. So
but what's your opinion? When war is really started? 2014?
Well,
2013.
2013, 2014.
I'd say 2013, starting from the revolution when they replaced Yanukovych, which was basically a puppet of Putin. I'd say the moment the Maidan revolution started, the moment the Maidan revolution finished and Yanukovych left was when the actual war started.
But think about, why does Maidan revolution start? Because Yanukovych is forced to, in a position where he has to sign the EU association agreement, which is the first step to becoming an EU country.
Yep.
Putin realizes, as I said earlier, if Ukraine becomes an EU country, becomes a prosperous European country, that's a huge threat to him. So he, reportedly, this is said to me by a source who really knows, that Putin told Yanukovych, he said, you sign that agreement, I'll break every bone in your body. So Yanukovych does a last-minute 180 and says, oops, I'm not signing. Then that's what causes everything to explode, and Maidan takes off. So Putin is literally responsible for that revolt taking place.
And Yanukovych ran away in Russia afterwards.
And he's still in Russia.
Somewhere.
Somewhere.
Yeah, he like
3 feet
disappeared,
underground. 3 feet underground.
So that's what is interesting, because people don't know our background. They already heard, Ukraine exists on the map of the world. Oh, wow, Crimea and so on. So they started already to hear about our motherland since that war. They didn't know what stood behind it, what is our history. And actually, I appreciate so much that you explained a lot of elements.
You mentioned Crimea, and people say, well, wasn't that really Russia? Didn't it?
Yeah.
No, it was Tatars. It was Crimean Tatars always.
Yep.
And they said, well, why did Khrushchev give Crimea to Ukraine? Because every time Crimea was put under a Russian administration, it turned into a hellhole. And Khrushchev personally went to Crimea at one point and talked to people there, and they told him what was going on. And that's when he made the decision to transfer it to be that it would be part of Ukraine. It would not be part of Russia. Russia was incapable of managing it, of administrating this territory. And ever since they ever since they invaded and seized it in 2014, it's just become one huge military base. That's all. That's not an economy. Can't survive like that long term.
Reuben, I have a question. We see what's going on this planet and what kind of presidents we choose, according to Putin's figure. You don't think that we need to create some kind of administration who gonna judge or create some restrictions to figure out which president goes to which country? Or for example, you're sick, you're too old, I don't know, you're like out of your mind, or you are already not mentally stable, you can't rule the country. There should be some committee that regulates this planet. Because let's see what happened. Who are our leaders in the world?
Well, the problem is that the standards keep changing all the time. Remember, they made Trump take this Montreal cognitive capability. Well, I can't remember the exact name, but it's the test you take to determine whether your mind is working properly, fully. And he aced it like that, and passed it with flying colors. But for some reason, they don't insist on Biden taking the same test. I wonder why. I mean, it must be like something I missed. Obviously, it's like Churchill said. He says, democracy is the worst form of government there is, except for all the others. I mean, it's always going to be messy. It's always going to be imperfect, but it's always going to be better than the other options. What I find that's just absolutely infuriating is we've forgotten about democratic principles. Ronald Reagan got in a huge fight with the Europeans when he came into office because he was determined to do everything he could to help Poland. And the Germans like, oh, no, you don't understand. You don't know the Russians the way we do. We're so smart, we're Germans. They think Poland belongs to them,
Mm-hmm.
And then it's same speech about Ukraine. Just take out the word Poland, put in the word same. The Russian, the German, dialogue hasn't changed at all. But Reagan said, okay, well, that's bollocks. I'm sorry. As the most powerful democracy in the world, yes, we are always committed to support our democratic allies, countries that have had democracy in place for a long time, but we have an even greater responsibility to those countries where democracy is just starting to take root. It's just starting to grow. That was Poland back then. That's Ukraine today. That's where the largest responsibility for the organized, established, wealthy, industrialized countries is, because there's no other. What's the other choice? What's the alternative? All the alternatives are worse. And oh, by the way, democracies never go to war with each other.
People from a side, foreigners, they don't understand the difference between being democratic and democracy. There are two different things when you live inside the United States. So you mentioned Reagan. Everybody's comparing Zelensky to Reagan. He's funny, sense of humor, comedian. Our president appeared to be brave. He never left the country with all those opportunities. Anyway, do you think people from other professions like Schwarzenegger, for example, or Klitschko, he was into boxing, they started to be politicians? Is it correct move at all?
Look, I don't think it really
matters.
Okay, what kind of profession someone had? Okay, certain professions lend themselves to politics because, for example, if you're a lawyer, you can suspend practicing law and go into politics, and then you can come back to, and you don't. It's not like if you leave certain professions and you're away for so many years, you lose all your seniority. You have to start from zero. So, but most important from my perspective. Certain individuals turned out to be really great leaders, partly because of timing, but also partly because of their own sort of internal mindset. Ronald Reagan went to bed every night knowing full well that a big chunk of the country believed that he was, they called him the amiable dunce. They believed that he really didn't understand what was going on, and he was just kind of sitting there, and he had all these smart people around him, and they were really running the country, and he was a figurehead. That didn't bother him. He's like, let them think what they want. I'm going to make the decisions. I'm going to do the best job I can. The people who have real problems in being are people who are basically so insecure, and they want, it's the I, me, I did this all by myself. The Obamas, the Clintons, the people like that. And I prefer the people who lead by example and don't spend all their time telling you how important they are.
Also, another comment that I would like to say, another nice phrase said by Churchill is that if you're young and you're not like a Democrat, like not democratic, then you have no heart. If you're old and you're not conservative, then you have no brains. So
He was
like,
great in
like,
those
like,
phrases. His sayings there forever.
Yeah, so you kind of get this argument of like, and in general, like, I mean, speaking of Reagan as well, you know, there's this joke that like politics is like acting, but for ugly people. They usually joke about it, and it's like, it's like when Reagan went into office, it's like a person playing on easy mode or like something like that, because like you know how to present yourself, you know how to actually get a point across, you know how to, let's just say, be likable. So like it's not necessarily that actors can't be good, like, or like you said, like for example, Klitschko or like Arnold. It's like it's not like they can't be in politics. Like, I mean, for example, look at Zelensky. He used to be a comedian, so it's kind of a form of acting, right? And look at him, his speeches. Look at how well he presents himself in foreign politics and foreign relations. Like, you have not had so many people give a foreign leader so many standing ovations when they gave speeches in the last, 20 years? 30? Have you ever had a person speak like that and present themselves? So you could say that even acting can be a talent which would be perfect for foreign politics and swaying, let's just say, certain political views and minds of people.
Absolutely, you know, because people are skeptical, they like prototypes, and they say if you're a sportsman, it means that you have no brain. But it's not. If you're a sportsman, you are very competitive, by the way, and you can be great in business. Or if you're a comedian, you know how to present yourself, you know how to touch heart of every single person, and you are very sensitive and you are very empathic. So, and you can be a great politician because you understand people's pain and you're here to help them and to influence them. Reuben, you mentioned a few questions ago that you're traveling for all those seminars. I know it was very, very hard to get you because you have a very tough schedule.
Yes.
What are those seminars about nowadays?
I'm glad you asked this because, well, I do a lot of different things. I attend air shows and defense shows where you can see the actual military hardware, and I know most of the people in these companies after so many years. But I also attend these what they're called security conferences, where you have defense ministers and prime ministers and heads of state and notable academics, and they talk about different issues that are facing the world. So the two largest ones is the Munich Security Conference, which is every year in February, and then the Shangri-La Dialogue, which is in Singapore, which is an Asia-Pacific Security Conference. It's always around the end of May time frame. And I went to, I've been going to both of them off and on for years, but I went to both of them this year. And in the case of Munich, it was the first Munich Security Conference since the war, because in 2022, it had just closed its doors, and then 2 days later, the Russians invade. And it was the second Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore since the war. And I went to both of them, and I came away, and I was just, to say I was disappointed would be particularly with the Munich event. I was disappointed because there was so much talk about subjects which I don't think are exactly should be at the top of the list when there's a war raging in Central Europe. And the two best events that I attended during that conference that really touched on what was going on in Ukraine, well, they weren't part of the conference regular itinerary. They were side events that were organized and paid for by Viktor Pinchuk, the son-in-law of the former President Kuchma of Ukraine. And then I got into the conference in Singapore, and we're sitting there, and the former general, head of the armed forces in Indonesia, who wants to become president now, suddenly announces he has a peace plan for Ukraine. And he said, both sides will pull back so many kilometers, and there'll be a demilitarized zone, and it'll be administered by the UN. That's a great idea. Not really. And we all kind of sat there, well, where did this come from? So in the afternoon, the Ukrainian defense minister, former defense minister now, Reznikov, was asked, did the Indonesians ever ask you about this before they just kind of threw that out there in front of us all? And he said, no, they didn't. And this does not sound like an Indonesian peace plan. It sounds like a Russian peace plan that someone has paid the Indonesians to go shopping for them. So I'm concerned that these things are, I mean, people used to say that these security conferences, they were boring in the age before we all had these things. They were boring, because people talked and you couldn't compress what they were saying into short sound bites. And I wish we'd get back to that, because what I see now is stuff that's not serious. I wrote an article about this, as a matter of fact, that was published last month, saying that these things need to get back to talking about what are real problems.
Reuben, what is your vision of reconstruction of Ukraine? Definitely when war going to be over.
Okay,
we are praying for that.
Okay, number one, it's going to cost ungodly amounts of money. That's one thing. Number two, Ukraine will have the most horrific problem with unexploded ordnance that we've ever seen in history. It'll be worse than Cambodia. It'll be worse than what we saw in Angola. It'll be worse than the Balkans. It'll be worse than Afghanistan. And the formula basically is for every day of conflict equals 1 month of clearing mines and unexploded ordnance. Okay, we're into almost 585 days. That's 585 months. How many years is that? So it's going to be horrendous.
It's like about 70 plus years.
Yeah, so there's going to have to be an application of technology to speed up that process. I'm not sure exactly what I know that, for example, every single piece of mine clearing equipment that existed in all of the United Kingdom has been shipped to Ukraine at this point. I mean, so we're maxed out on what we've got now to try to start clearing this. But here's it. The other issue that I worry about is that in this country we have laws, we have auditors, we have agencies, we have all of these mechanisms that are supposed to prevent government money from just disappearing. And yet there are billions of dollars worth of funds that were put into different organizations and companies as COVID relief, and we don't know where it went. And there's been massive fraud. Now, what's going to happen in a place like Ukraine, I don't know, because none of that tradition in history of all of these multiple checks and balances to prevent government money from disappearing exist. And you're going to have a huge sum of money just thrown into a place all at once. And I think that's going to be the most difficult job that anybody could possibly have.
Reuben, thank you so much for your professional expertise. And I started with a woman, and I would like to finish with Antonio, who is representing younger generation, with my philosophical question to you. What do you think Ukraine needs besides money to win this war?
Oh God, that's hard. I mean, to win the war, it needs to end faster. Each passing day, you get more people with psychological problems, which they will have once they come back. Like, I mean, I think at this point, what Ukrainians will need is a large supply of psychiatrists.
And what does it mean for you to be Ukrainian?
I love home, love the people, love the culture. I love what it means to be free.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And on this high note, I would like to end this interview and to thank everybody. This interview is dedicated to our great soldiers, to our smart, brave, strong men who are saving the planet and saving the nation. I don't know how many of us will stay alive, but thank you. You are so brave, and you're fighting for us and for our future. And we love and appreciate you. And thank you, Irina, that you brought your man here, because I know that your boys, they are very fast, they are everywhere, they are very busy. Reuben, your contribution is absolutely incredible. You can cover so many topics I wish people like you would be heard, would be read, would be spread, because your knowledge is priceless. Absolutely.
May I say something, Irina? 1 year ago, Reuben was nominated for its year award for the best correspondent of the year, defense correspondent. So, and Reuben at those time was in Singapore. So I went to Washington D.C. and on his behalf, I got his award. So he's the best correspondent, defense correspondent of 2022.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great, to admire your husband and to be proud of him. Yeah. That's incredible. Thank you so much. And Antonio, personal thank you to you, because I know that you weren't ready to open your heart for a while. Now you were ready, and I appreciate so much that you gave me a chance to talk to you and to sit next to you. Thank you so much for your trust.
Thank you very much for inviting.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who were watching us today with faith and love. Irina.